Brett here. All right, I think this is Paradox Diaries 29. Tonight, I want to get into lying or lies. Now, when I say lie, I could have said model because it's the same thing. I could say that because of emptiness, but let me describe through an example. I've done a lot of teaching on and off since 1985, and I sucked at the beginning. I got better, then I got worse, blah, blah, blah. But one thing I finally sort of settled on was, as you're teaching material, if you know the material really well, you'll often forget some of the bridge metaphors that got you there. Concrete example, you're a new Tai Chi student, and I'm demonstrating something like the following. Okay, shift your weight, empty step, step up, empty step, versus step up and hold a ball. When I was taught Tai Chi, I learned step up and hold a ball, and that was my bridge metaphor. Once I understood that general shape, I was able to then work into details. But once you learn the details, you forget the general shapes. And the reason I started Paradox Diaries with the gyroscope was because of that. I wanted to show an example of creating a self-stabilizing system or a paradox, and this is what has been going on. So now let's talk about lying. So I used to say in classes, okay, it's Monday. I'm going to tell you something today, and then I'm going to change what I'm saying tomorrow, and I'm going to change it again. I'm going to lie to you, but my lies are going to get closer and closer to reality. Now, I could have said again, on Monday, I'm going to give you a model. It's going to be a simple model. On this Tuesday, I'm going to give you a higher fidelity model. On the third day, on the fourth day, and so on. Or I could have said, hey, right now, do this. Don't question it. I promise I'm going to give you some heuristics. Day 2, hey, do this, but sometimes do this instead, and here's why. Day 3, maybe I'm into heuristics so that you can guide yourself. But the bottom line is, to get to a complex thought, oftentimes you have to use bridge metaphors, like scaffolding. For example, look at a skyscraper. Do you see any scaffolding in a skyscraper? There's scaffolding, it's on the inside, but there was also scaffolding on the outside. So that scaffolding was there to allow the creation of the thing. And then once the thing is self-stabilized, the scaffolding goes away. So for me, I learn a subject, I go through the bridge metaphors until I get the model, whatever the model is. The problem is I forget the bridge metaphors, and if I'm going to train, it's not skillful for me to tell you about empty stepping if you've never been to Tai Chi. It's not. It's useless. I mean, I can talk about the principle, but if I'm actually trying to, in the moment, teach you, I need to use a lot less information. And really, this gets into lean, low whip, low work in process, or single focus, single batch size. So when I'm practicing the form, if I'm actually trying to practice something, I practice one thing. So for example, during the form, I'm going to keep my font snail up. I'll probably do it half the time as opposed to 30% of the time, but I'm going to try to do this. Or maybe I'll try to keep my shoulders down, or maybe I'll keep my hip tucked under. For 2 months, I practice simply whenever I'm in a horse stance, whenever I'm in this stance, I rotate my feet around in a figure 8. So now I just do that. But initially, you go forward, you go back, and then you go forward in a figure 8, and then you realize ball of foot, heel, ball, toes, side. And I've talked about this in many videos, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But the bottom line is, oftentimes, thoughts might seem simple to me or to you, but that's because you forgot all the heavy lifting you did to get to the point where the hard thing became simple. And so when I say I'm lying when I'm teaching, what I'm really saying is I would love to give you all the information, but I couldn't learn the information all at once. Maybe you can, but I doubt it, because it takes a while to form neural patterns, and you're actually remodeling neurons in the brain, and that doesn't happen in 0 time, right? Your brain is an amazing thing, but it's still a chemical biological apparatus, and your neurons can have 1,000 connections or more. So even though you're, even at this point, still creating neurons every day, hopefully you're doing something to allow those neurons to have a place to attach. Your brain is constantly being remolded and restructured. And in fact, this is a recent realization. I think in the early Paradox Diaries, I was talking about trauma nodes. So let me go into trauma for a second. So in my understanding of trauma, and this is coming from, say, a psychophysiological perspective, trauma is simply this. You were in a situation where your nervous system got overloaded. Maybe the music was too loud. Maybe someone's yelling at you. Maybe there was smoke. Maybe you were agitated. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What happens is your brain is constantly doing stuff. What happens if it's in the middle of working on something and it's got some neurons and it's doing some chemical reprogramming, and all of a sudden there's an overload? It's random. It's chaotic. Who knows what's going to happen? But what will happen is the connections of those neurons involved in that overload of a biochemical overload, you don't know what they're going to be, but typically what happens is they become partially disconnected. They start feeding on each other. And then every so often, if you happen to get close to them, and I mean literally, if a series of neural firings happens to get close to that, this tight node all of a sudden releases a blast of energy into the system. And because you haven't been building up resilience, you trigger, you overload, you increase your sympathetic dominance. All of a sudden, you're getting tight, you're increasing your inflammation, blah, blah, blah. So somatic work, you take those neurons that you're forming every day and you gently, over time, loosen your body, you loosen your mind, you get those connections so that those traumatic nodes that are high energy, when they dissipate, they don't overload the system. So over time, you sort of touch it, you get to the edge, it's too much. You touch it, you get to the edge, it's still too much, but it's not as much. You can actually eventually get full connected. And so when we talk about embodiment, what we're really talking about is there are these chaotic nodes in your brain, strange attractors if you like chaos theory. And if they ever get triggered, they can send out chaos and random signals. You don't know why you did what you just did. That's because you literally have a connection in your brain that was formed in a place where your system overloaded, and it has unpredictable behavior. That's what's going on. It's pretty simple. So there's no value judgment there. It doesn't matter why your nervous system overloaded. It just did. Doesn't matter. Could have been genetics, could have been food, could have been the sun hit your eye, and I don't know. It doesn't matter. It did happen. And also, it happened, so it's in the past. Can't change actually, you can't change the past, but you can change your relationship to the past. And that's kind of what we're doing here. You've got this information in your brain, and it was stored at a particular time in a particular circumstance, and it happens to be dysfunctional now. But it can be refunctional, or dysfunctional is wrong. It totally functions, right? It just so happens that the function is a non-standard function in a very complicated system, and as a result, the complicated system can't handle the signals because it wasn't built to do so. And so over time, by growing and slowly healing your brain, you're increasing the potential amount of electrical connections that can dissipate those high complexity nodes. So the more you do that, the more you grow your interconnections through parasympathetic dominant works, the more you're able to take on bigger nodes, and eventually you collapse until you get these huge epiphanies, or you get these huge somatic releases, tremors. So you can actually feel it in your brain. And I felt them. So that's what, I'm sorry, I think I've gone to a logical end on that story. So trauma is a response to the system being overloaded, and this kind of somatic work can help you get to those systems. But also, just shaking alone. Okay, I'm moving everything. My brain is moving up and down gently. The brain is bouncing off of each other. It's bouncing off the skull. That's causing interference patterns, random noise, stochastic noise. And stochastic noise tends to be good in a certain range for systems like the way our body works, right? So our bodies are complex systems. The chaos nodes, I would say, are chaotic systems. And I'm using those terms in the context of Cynefin system. And so complex systems, the characteristic, and I don't remember exactly in that model between complex and chaotic, but chaotic is you don't know what's going on and you just have to kind of guess. Complex systems, you don't necessarily know what's going on. They're nonlinear. That's important. But the thing is, you can probe. I can do an experiment and see what works. Like, for example, 4 months ago or so, I was doing some stuff on back bends, and then I sort of put it off to the side. And then last night, I was like, or 2 nights ago, I was like, I stretched my hip flexors. I'm pretty certain my hip flexors were limiting me. So last night I tried to do the wheel pose, full Uddha Brand, I don't know how to pronounce it in Sanskrit. And I wasn't able to do it, but I was noticeably better than the last time I tried it. And it was because my hip flexors were loose. Also, side note, I have been lying about in all my videos about don't do yang stuff after the stretching. You don't, in general. Like, for example, after I've done deep flexibility stretching front splits, I'm not going to go on a run. I will tear muscles. I will do damage to myself. I'll probably mess up my joint. I mean, it's not going to be good. But when I did the full wheel pose, I did after stretching my hip flexors, and I made the observation that the simple rule is don't do yang after yin for 3 to 4 hours. The more complicated rule, so that was a lie, because the more complicated rule is don't use the muscles. You can move them. Moving's fine, but don't use them. If you're not using them, you can move them. And when I did the full wheel pose, I stretched my back, but notice I'm not using, standing I'm using them, but on the ground, I'm trying to get rid of my hip flexors. I'm trying to get out of my hip flexors into my feet so that I don't have a crick in my back. And so I've made a lot of progress on that by doing whole body work. And shaking is an example of whole body work. And the noise of shaking literally shakes those chaos nodes or those trauma nodes in your brain and can help partially dissipate information, electricity feedback, but it can also, over time, help get things closer and further. So it's almost like you've got this power over here, and by shaking, you're actually allowing stuff to dissipate in small bursts as opposed to grounding, full grounding. So this somatic practice, I can tell you, it works for me, has worked for me, continues to work for me. And the whole Paradox Diaries, I made an observation a long time ago that no one's watching my videos, and that's fine. I don't care if anyone's watching my videos because they're for me. I practice more if I record. And also I talk about things, and so I'm processing things, and I'm actively aware of what I'm processing now, but also later on I go back and listen. And a lot of times my implicit brain, who I named Fred, by the way, Fred, who's talking right now to you, this isn't Brett, this is Fred. Fred, okay, now it's Brett, I switched over. Earlier, I was channeling Fred. I was allowing my ego to stay out of the way, and I was letting Fred to talk. Now I've come into it as my explicit self as opposed to my implicit self. And so I just lost the flow. Sorry, Fred, that was unintentional. Now, Fred's not real, and I'm not real. We're both empty. But the question is, since everything is a lie, and Fred is a lie, and Brett is a lie, because they're all models, is the model helpful? Let me explain to you how Fred is really helpful. 1, it's acknowledgement of a part of myself. 2, it's a way for me to attempt to communicate. 3, I can communicate to Fred. The challenge isn't me communicating to Fred. The challenge is Fred communicating to me. And if I just shut the heck up, that is, if I reduce the noise of my default mode, if I basically get my brain calm and my body calm, so the whole thing calm, I can start to hear and see signals from Fred. This is called, what's the term for that? Preloading. Like I can notice my frontal cortex getting preloaded with images. A couple times. I have to be calm. I generally have to be a little high or have been relaxing, like deliberately relaxing. But in fact, I can. And then when I start to communicate with Fred, it works. So first example of me, I had this experience of having conversations with myself for years. It's a standard practice in trauma healing and also in working with your inner child. By the way, I'm a software developer, but this stuff works, so that's why I'm talking about it. And I shouldn't have done that. I lost my train of thought. Trauma healing, response to trauma. I lost it. That's the problem. So let me talk about the word channeling, since I've already mentioned that. I'm using it in a particular way. And the way I'm using it is this. I've spent time over the years learning a bunch of stuff in a bunch of different fields. And I happen to be a good lateral thinker, and that's a survival bias based on my family of origin issues and blah, blah, blah. And I really appreciate it. So my brain is really good at making patterns. Great. So, man, here I am, I'm just going all over the place. So I'm losing my train of thought. So I'm not channeling, but back to channeling. So when I have the mental reserve to just sort of calm down and just let myself flow, then things just happen. And a lot of times my brain will say things that it has heard, and then it reformulates it. Very much if you've ever worked with an LLM, they often do that. My experience with LLMs is they often will mirror or reflect back to me things that I've said with slight variations, and it makes and the LLM makes connections that I was maybe partially aware of or not aware of at all, and it makes something explicit that was implicit, and all of a sudden there's a little micro aha. But that also happens. I've noticed. I was recently rereading, or I was recently reviewing a book. What Did You Say by Charlie Schuster and Jerry Weinberg, and I noticed that even though I haven't actually reread the book, my understanding of the material is just completely different, and that's because I spent all this time reviewing the Weinberg and Satir stuff, and then also Buddhism, and I see the system relationships and all that kind of stuff. And so now, as I read stuff, like a good example, Triad. Observer, observed observation, or as Virginia Satir would say, self, other, context. So any event, any bit of reality has minimum of 3. I've talked about this before. Could be 4, could be 5, but minimum of 3, not 2. 2 is not complete, it's a dyad. Dyads are unstable. So the typical exercise of a Zen koan is observe the triad, see what's missing, and then when you figure out whether it's observer, observed observation, or sometimes 2 of those, then you can answer the koan. It's just a mental exercise. It's nothing profound at all. In fact, the whole purpose of it is to train your brain, mental calisthenics in a sense, so that you can build larger models of representation in reality. And so notice I'm channeling now. I got out of myself and I'm just talking about it. Now, of course, I'm now back to being self-aware that I was talking about the fact that I wasn't self-aware, that I was just flowing. And that's an interesting paradox. That's a switching between implicit and explicit. And when you can do that more fluidly, you're more mind-body integrated. Right? Nothing magical about it. If you turn, and by the way, this laughing, breathing stuff is, I'm actually, this is effortful. It's not high effort, but it is effort. And so, in fact, I'm stimulating my diaphragm, which is going to sound like, sometimes I'm laughing. Sometimes I'm laughing, right? Sometimes I'm happy because if you see me smile, it's often the situation where I'm observing what my inner dialogue is saying. And I'm like, that's pretty good. I wouldn't have thought of that. I being the explicit part of myself versus the implicit. And again, that's a lie, that's a model. Fred's not real, Brett's not real. We're all partial instantiations of the true singularity. So just for context, I believe that everything is connected. And I mean that in a literal sense, an actual sense. I'm connected to all of my past. I am the connection to all of my future. And while the connection is not equal, it's not the same fidelity, my future doesn't exist without me currently. That's like talking about an instantaneous bardo. So in Buddhism, there's this idea of a bardo. You die, you go into a state, a bardo, that is a representation of your last thought or your last state of being. And so if you remain calm, you go into the bardo calm. If you are agitated, you go in agitated. Actually, it's very much like THC. When you smoke THC, that initial 20 minutes, you turn up dopamine, I believe it is, and that turns up pattern recognition. So if you're paranoid, you get more paranoid. If you're happy, you get more happy. If you know that's a thing and you start to get paranoid, just breathe. It's going to pass. You can do it. So knowing that that is a possible thing allows you to ride it out. So, I remember what I forgot to say. So my first time, Fred. So I've had Fred for a long time, just as a way to think about things. And realistically, if you think about it, if you've ever prayed, it's kind of the same thing, right? You're talking to your internal representation of God, and God either does or does not see that. Now, to me, God is empty, right? If God is a useful tool for you to get through life and it's helpful, God is awesome. For me, God is the singularity. So you and I, if you have a belief, we have the same belief. It's just, I'm simultaneously an atheist and deeply spiritual. And to me, that's completely fine, because all I'm saying is all concepts are empty. And so gods are empty. That is, gods are in relationship to your view of God. You ask 2 people for the same perspective on the same God, you're going to get different answers because each person has a relationship to the God. Now, let me turn that around. Let's say God is real, because first of all, I don't know. I don't care. I'm neutral on the subject when I say I don't care. Does God, serve a purpose for you? I've just lost my train of thought there, and I don't really want to go into this. I don't want to get about, I'm not big on religion, but I also don't want to, there's nothing wrong with religion per se, other than what are the effects of the practice of the religion. But since God is a relationship you have, I remember what I was going to say. Let's assume that God is real. And I'm fine with that. Because in fact, I have a God. My God is different from your God. But there's like, what, 80,000 gods in history. So the fact that my God is different from your God is an imperative. And the fact that you and I have different interpretations of the same God would still be an imperative. We're still talking about different things because no independent arising, emptiness. Your God is not my God. Even though we say they're the same thing, my ability to understand that thing is limited by my body, yours as well, and also your experiences. I'm limited by my experiences and so on. So my perspective or view of whatever that thing is not going to be the same as yours. So we talk about God being absolute in all truth. Fine, but none of us have that truth. It's all partial, right? You can't be the thing that you're saying is all powerful and observe it. Because in the observation, you're actually defining what it is. And if you define it as all powerful, then you will react to that thing. If you define it as capricious, you'll react that way. So if your God is Loki and chaotic, you'll have one reaction. If it's something to do with Ragnarok, if you're going for Vikings, you'll have a different aesthetic. If it's a more modern thing, a different aesthetic. So let's not evaluate beliefs on whether they're true or not, because I started this by saying everything is a lie. Truth is a lie. And what I mean by that is, what is truth? No independent arising. Your truth isn't necessarily my truth. They could be the same. Like if we watch an event and we actually see the same thing and we have the same reaction, which is absolutely possible, we see a bird land on the ground. Great. It's a relatively neutral event. No kind of triggering or anything like that. But you might see something that makes you comfortable, and I might be nervous about it, and vice versa. Interesting analog, actually. In food, if I eat white rice, I know it spikes my blood sugar, unless I add a lot of fat. Maybe not for you. How you react to white rice and how I react to white rice will probably be consistent unless I've done some kind of change in my diet or exercise to have different epigenetic expressions. But in a given time, in a given point in time, and for a certain amount of time, my reaction is generally going to be consistent. Your reaction is going to be consistent, and it's going to be your reaction. Same with HRV. Whatever my HRV is, doesn't matter. And by the way, speaking of HRV, which is sort of the whole impetus for the Paradox Diaries, last night I started at 29 and I landed at 28. And I think I know why. I think it had to do with I used cannabis to help me sleep, and I think I took an edible a little bit later than normal, and that was suppressing my HRV, which is a known thing. Tonight, I didn't do that, and I'm starting with an HRV of 59. This morning, I woke up with an HRV of 49. Wait, 52. Sorry, 52, which was 53. No, it's 53. That's what it was. So that's better. Yesterday it was 49. Today it's 53. So I've been changing a few habits this week in terms of I'm not drinking anything with NutraSweet in it for a few weeks. And I'm working on my sweet tooth. And I'm doing a few other things. And so there's no surprise that since I'm changing some habits right now, which I try to do on a regular basis, my HRV is reflecting changes. And then I expect it to go back to some form of stability. Though based on the fact that it's 59 now, I suspect it's going to go up. Maybe not tonight, but in the morning. I suspect I'm going to slowly eke it into the 60s. Now, the numbers are irrelevant, but here's the numbers that are important. I've done measurements, I want to say, 29 times, probably 29 times. Maybe more than that, because I might have started measuring before the Paradox Diaries. But let's say it's roughly 30. Of those two measurements, I have two. One where it went down by one, and one where it went... I want to say there's another one where it either dropped or stayed the same. Otherwise, most of the time, my heart rate variability, whatever the baseline is before I start shaking and doing my stretching, it goes up from 50 to 200%. So for example, the biggest change was high 30s to 56. That was surprising to me. I expected I think it was 30 to 56. I've got the numbers, I can look it up. But the point is, generally speaking, I know that whatever I'm doing here results in an HRV increase, which suggests vagal tone activation over time, which suggests reduced inflammation over time, reduced A1C over time, possibly improved insulin resistance over time. The problem is you have to do it. It takes, for me, I find 10 minutes is the sweet spot in terms of where I start to get a big effect. And I've already been going for another 15 or 20 minutes. But that goes back to channeling. Part of the reason I like talking is I don't want to bounce for 10 minutes. It's not that fun. Though, if I really close my eyes and sort of feel it, I can go for a while. But I can do what I'm doing now and talk through it, and the time just disappears. And so my distraction is my health practice, which is perfect. All right, that's enough shaking. Let's see, I'm gonna do a quick check, top to bottom. So I've got some nice dents in the yoga mat there. I've got some tingling like I normally do. I don't have any kind of specific soreness, and I'm sweating along my neck. Now, interestingly, so I am pumping my lymph system. Where does your lymph system put good materials back into your body? Right here. So the fact that I'm feeling a little sweat specifically here, I don't know about this for certain, but it might just be that since my collar happens to be in about the same place, that's what the sweat is from. But I'm not sweating as much down here as I am specifically here. And I suspect that might be related to the lymph system pumping out good stuff, or pumping stuff out. Okay, now, I didn't have any specific plans for stretching, but my recent themes have been a lot of hip stuff, and mostly hip stuff, groin, and so on. So I'm going to switch it up tonight. And since I was working on the back bend last night, you stretch your front to loosen your back. Let me show you what I mean by that. Is I want to do a back bend, right? Let's say I sit all day and my hip flexors are really, really tight. I can't do a good back bend, right? Loosen your hip flexors and you can do a good back bend. Right? And the secret to a good back bend, even though I can't do it, so this is where I can be a coach, but I can't actually do it yet. I'm going to do it eventually, but it'll happen when it happens. Right here, right at the cervical level, you want to get out of here when you're doing a back bend. And the way you do that is you open up your hip flexors and you push into your feet. And what that does is it allows you to arch. Like right here, I can get a big arch and I'm not feeling anything in my lower back. Now, if I just do this, I feel that. But if I push out a little bit more, I can get a bigger arch. So along those lines, since I've been doing this, I'm going to go ahead and do that on the wall in what is characteristically my favorite pose. The pups aren't here. I don't need the blankets for the pups. Here we go. So I'm going to use the wall, and I'm just going to basically hang on the wall. This is a really intense pose. Most people have tight chests from breathing up here and also just tension. So this is going to open up your intercostals. It's going to open up your shoulder blades. And depending, it's going to pull your armpits. And I find that I can also get my trapezius muscles, but that didn't happen until a while into doing the pose, probably a year. It's been a while. And when I say it's a year, I generally, on average, do this pose once a week, let's say, just for numbers. Probably more than that, but it doesn't matter. So a year is 55 times. So I'm going to round that down to 50. I do it for 5 minutes, so that's 250 minutes. Just for raw numbers. But the raw numbers those raw numbers to me aren't as important as the 50. Since I've done it 50 times, I've gone in and out. Actually, it's been 4.5 years, so now it's more like 200 times. But I go in and out, and each time it's like a micro universe. I go into an experience, I have an experience, I come out. Also, I've changed my body. So I'm gonna do 5 minutes. Ooh, okay. I've been noticing that 10 minutes or more, even 2 to 3 minutes of Qigong shaking ups the intensity of my stretches. And I think that's for 2 reasons, 2 big reasons. Big reason 1, I'm shifting parasympathetic. I'm less in my head, I'm less in my ego, I've got less chatter. And since I've got less chatter and my nervous system is turned down, I can feel signals in my body. And so I can get to edges before I stretch too far. And that reduces the required mental fatigue, the required mental resilience to handle the sitting with discomfort. So by reducing the signal noise through shaking, I'm able to better sense where I'm at in the stretch. And as a result, I need less mental energy to maintain it. That's one side of it. That's the conserve side. The other side, though, is everything's starting at a looser. I've moved blood through my system. My muscles are all loosened up. This really loosens your joint, loosens your muscles, helps your lymphatic system, yada, yada, yada. And so I'm already loose. So my experience is, whereas before it was 90 seconds to 2 minutes to start to feel, the muscles are really relaxing in a deep way. 30 seconds now. And that means that when you do a 3-minute pose versus a 5-minute pose, I can do 3-minute poses all day long. They're great, and you totally get something out of it. But when I do those extra 2 minutes on a deep hip pose, I notice the difference. It's more mentally fatiguing. And also it releases a lot more. So you need to do whatever you can to turn down the signals so that you can read your body, so that you can safely do this for a long time. Now, I'm going to give you one more safe thing. Ready? I just brushed my teeth a little while ago. I'm going to lick my hands. Now, I could get water, but I'm just being pragmatic. In this pose, at 3 minutes, if you slip a little bit, it's okay. When you get to 4 or 5 minutes, if you slip, and when I say slip, just like half an inch, the reverberations down your exceptionally stretched arm are both painful and potentially dangerous. So I don't want to slip. If I can't hold the pose, I'll get out of it, I'll go back in. And I'm not doing a rep. I will reset the timer and start over. So generally speaking, I don't do reps. But if you have to do reps. I just prefer not to, and it's generally better because it defeats the purpose. You're trying to turn down your nervous system. If you come out and go back in, you're turned up, turn it down. So it's kind of counterproductive. But if you can't hold a pose and you need to take a break, and then you go back and do the pose, is that better than not doing the pose? Yeah, I said something like that last night. I was working on my salad smoothie, and I was being consistent, and then I kept getting it more and more complicated and more healthy and all that kind of stuff. The thing I ended up with is just a nutritional powerhouse, just near complete nutritionally. And also, I got tired of it, and it was a pain, and it was a bit much. So I've gone back to the basics, and I'm being more consistent. And I'm still getting most of, if not all of the effect. So don't let good get in the way, or don't let better get in the way. So let me see. Don't let perfection get in the way of a little bit better. Because if you think about it, if we buy into emptiness, everything is connected. And so when you make any kind of change, you're changing all the connections to it potentially as well. So by making a smaller change, you're actually reducing, from a emptiness perspective, the number of connections, because the bigger the change, the more the connections, the more inertia, the harder it's going to be. And if you can make a small change one day, then you know you can do it. Then you can make a second small change. And these small perturbations, like shaking, can have big, profound effects if you do them. And so now I'm going to do this pose. And I think I'm just going to go silent on this one so I can really get into it. So see you in 5 minutes. I will talk getting into it and getting out of it, but during the pose, I don't know. If my implicit brain, Fred, wants to talk, it'll talk. One other thing I'm going to do. I have this little device that produces frequencies similar to the shaking frequencies, or rather different frequencies, but similar idea magnetically. And what this does is it stimulates the vagus nerve. And I can put it here. I can put it down here. I've got another one for under a pillow. I don't get anything for saying these. These are neorhythms, and I totally advocate for them. They're not cheap, but they work. But they're completely unnecessary. It's a bonus. You don't need it. It's a bonus. Okay, I'm laying on the ground. Head is basically touching the baseboard. In fact, head is now actually touching the wall. I'm going to reach up with both hands, and then I'm going to spread them. You can go narrow or wide. A little bit wider is probably easier to start with. If you go narrow, it hits the shoulder blades more. If you go wide, it hits the armpits a bit more. So play with it, but try to be symmetrical and try to have the same height. Now, I'm going to start the timer. I'm going to go into the pose, and I'm going to relax. Okay, now I will talk about this pose. Why is this pose so intense? We hold tension in our chest. If you're already sympathetic dominant, you're tight in the chest. This is going to hammer you. In the classic SOS sequence, I was able to do all the poses the time recommended. I was using props, whatever, but I was able to do it, except for this pose. 3 minutes and 11 or 12 seconds into the pose, I had something go on and I had to get out of it. It was a mental issue, an issue with my tissues. And I've had my first experience that I can definitely relate to was from yoga in 2000. And it was in my solar plexus. And every time I did the boat pose, I felt nauseous 3 times. And then on the 4th time, whatever it was, I let go of it. And Susie Curtis, who was the yoga instructor at the time, said, your ego is going to want to know what it is, but you don't need to know what it is. It's just gone. And that worked for me. Now, I need to really stop talking because I'm really stretching my chest and my lungs, and it's hard to get a good breath and talk while I'm doing, such deep stretching. I'm going to lower my hands just a touch, though. One thing, I'm curling my toes under to push my chest a little bit forward. It slightly deepens the pose and changes the angle just a bit. So that's something you might play with. And whether you have your head down or up, depends on your neck, depends on what you're looking for. When I started this pose, I couldn't do the thing what I'm doing with my neck. It would give me a migraine. And now I don't get those migraines. And that's an example of repairing. Repairing is the wrong word. I have to maintain my practice or my neck and my back will go to hell. And by hell, I mean daily pain, headaches, maybe eventually migraines because of whiplash in '86 and falling off a train bridge in 1981. Okay, at this point, if you'll notice, I think my elbows are going out just a little bit. The creases of my elbows are still primarily pointing up, so there's no pressure on my elbows. But what that is doing is it's hitting my trapezius muscles quite a bit more. And so this can be a big trap release. Feeling it in my rotator cuffs a little bit, in my shoulder blades. And this is a great pose to practice taking deep belly breaths or diaphragmatic breathing, because when you do that, watch as I move my body. I'm making subtle movements with my stomach, and then I relax. And in doing that, you're gently going closer to an edge. So you're undulating closer and closer to the edge of whatever is the extent that you're going to stretch today. So it's a gentle, safe practice. It's kind of akin to shaking. It's a general thing, taking in your belly, breathing, using it as part of your pose. You can. So notice, it looks like I'm doing a back bend, but I'm stretching my front. I do feel it in my shoulders and such, but I'm feeling this primarily in my upper chest. Okay, to get out of this, I'm going to really push into my diaphragm to take the pressure off my arms, lift one arm down, hold myself up, lift the other arm down. And then a good counter to this is turtle back. So I'm going to push into my elbows, and I'm going to just pull my shoulders forward and sort of arch my back. There we go. Okay, so just observation. I did start looser, not as much as when my hips. So the shaking seems to do better loosening of my hips than my shoulders, but I was still looser to start with. Doesn't surprise me. There's a lot more going on in terms of connective tissues in the hips. So it doesn't surprise me that, for example, if you want to target your psoas muscle, it takes some effort to get to the point where you can actually get to it. You can do it, but it takes some time. But shaking gets there because shaking gets the whole body. So that's why one of the reasons I love shaking is I'm getting some benefit across the system. And I want to be gentle because if I'm not gentle, I could actually, I'm not going to hurt, it's unlikely I'm going to hurt myself, but I'm not necessarily going to help myself either. All right. Katie, are we done? I will say this, I'm not going to do any more shoulder stretches, but there are 2 more stretches to sort of completely open up your shoulder. It works for me. The 2 stretches are, 1, laying on your stomach again. I normally would have my feet on the ground, but my feet are too close to the wall to do that. Cross your arms. Call this pretzel arms. Elbows cross. Hands are going opposite each other. Put your chin on your arm. Asymmetrical, so you do it twice. Left in front of right, right in front of left. I love this pose. Do it with a timer, because once you get used to doing this pose, you'll fall asleep in it. Last time I did it, I fell asleep. And then the last one is this one. Okay, so for this pose, I did this pose, was it 2.5, 3 years? 2 years. So roughly 500 minutes. And then I got into the coaching program for this practice because I wanted to get better at it. And I watched the videos ahead of the class. And so before I ever got to the class, I got this adjustment. And this one adjustment completely opened up my traps. In fact, 2 times of doing this pose this way allowed me to do the following. I used to have to turn my head, like when I'm driving, I'd have to turn my shoulders. So I went from this, having to turn my shoulders, to being able to just turn my head side to side, not feeling anything. So angles matter. And anyone who says don't use props when you're doing deep flexibility work, if that works for you, great. But frankly, I'm going to do what works for me, and this works for me. So the difference is, here is the pose unmodified. I start in the down dog. I narrow the down dog, and then I widen the down dog, and then I get into my shoulders. I can almost do it, but I can't quite get there. Blocks are almost sufficient. In fact, I could probably use blocks at this point. All I do is this. This is the adjustment. And all of a sudden, I'm dumping into my shoulders. And in fact, I said I wasn't going to do any more shoulder work. I really like this pose as well. When I did it for 2 years, I was like, meh. Because the way I ended up doing it, I was doing this basically and just getting a great stretch of my hamstrings and my calves. Hamstrings and calves are easy to stretch. There's lots of poses for those. Trapezius muscles and shoulders. So on this pose, yeah, the hamstrings and other things come along for the ride. That's great. But my concern is my shoulder blades. And so I try to get it to where I feel the pressure between my shoulder blades, and then feel my breastbone collapsing all the way down to the mat. It's not going to happen, but as you start to see things relax and you start to feel your chest open up, and when you're going to come out of this pose, if again, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, you need to do this. Put your hand on the ground, lock it out. Put the other hand on the ground, lock it out. Your back is not going to like this until you get back into a standing position. Bend your knees, put one hand on one knee, lock it out, or hold it. I want to keep my back stable, and then push up. I'm pushing with my arms. I'm not using my back. You don't want to use the muscles you just stretched until once I'm back to here, I'm fine. But getting to neutral, whatever neutral is, that's the transition where you need to go slow, slow, slow. All right. It's late enough. I'm going to call it night, but Paradox Diaries 29-ish out. Good night.